In January of last year, Hawaii woke up to a bizarre and frankly terrifying warning when the emergency alert system issued a ballistic missile alert. That episode sent the islands into a state of panic, and that day, apparently, was the impetus for Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard to decide to run for president. She came to the conclusion that U.S. brinksmanship had put her home state and the country at large in that position in the first place.
This threat is real. This threat is real and has been created by leaders who have failed us through their broken and destructive foreign policy. And then they tell us, oh, here's a sophisticated alert system that'll tell you when an attack is coming, and we're going to tell you to seek immediate shelter, but there is no shelter. Not in Hawaii, not anywhere in this country.
That was an excerpt from an interview by journalists Katie Halper and Matt Taibbi in their sit-down for their inaugural episode of their podcast, Useful Idiots. They covered a lot of ground with Gabbard. Taibbi wrote a full profile on their conversation with Gabbard. It's featured in this month's Rolling Stone. Joining us live via Skype to tell us more about what Gabbard said is Katie Halper. She's the co-host of the Rolling Stone's Useful Idiot podcast and host of the Katie Halper Show podcast. Welcome, Katie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, Katie, what do you think were the most interesting parts of your interview with Tulsi Gabbard, and what really sets her apart in her ideology from the rest of your field? You spent a lot of time with her.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me okay now?
Yes.
Yeah, we got you. Loud and clear.
So I thought that what was most interesting about the interview with Tulsi Gabbard was the fact that so few people had actually done remotely responsible interviews with her. So many of the people who interview her kind of engage in gotcha journalism and parrot and repeat these talking points and these smears and really don't get to the substance of what she's talking about. And so that was really exciting to me, to actually be able to engage in the discussion that was productive and that got deeper than just being just asking her about kind of asking her gotcha questions, because that's so much what we see, and that's exactly what we saw in light of the Kamala Harris exchange.
Yeah, I mean, that was what struck me about your interview with her as well. I don't think any other candidate has been as sort of caricatured, dismissed, otherwise condescended to, ridiculed, smeared as much as Tulsi Gabbard, frankly. And so what we got from her, I think, in your interview was there's a lot of confusion about what motivates her and this ridiculous conspiracy theories about how she's a Russian plant, et cetera, et cetera. What did you learn about what the driving force behind Tulsi and her approach to politics really is?
Well, I think that she spoke about how service-oriented she was, and we kind of knew that because of her work in Congress, and of course her being forces in the military. I think it was really interesting to hear from her in more detail about how much that affected her being in the Army, and of course about how that scare in Hawaii affected her with the where they thought it was like the end of the world. And it was interesting, of course, that for her as a younger person, the environment was really motivating for her. And of course, you can imagine, and we talked about this in the interview, how if you live in Hawaii, that's such a beautiful environment, and how that really hits home in a way that maybe it doesn't in other places in the world, when your environment is so stunning and pristine and you see that that's at risk. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of it's like it was a gateway issue for her. I think that we use that word in the interview, which it is for so many people, the environment. You don't have to come from that politicized a background to make the connections between the way the world is being treated.
So I know that she also addressed her spat with Kamala Harris. Why don't we take a listen to that, and then we'll get into it.
And it's so ridiculous that it's laughable. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, it's so ridiculous. Yeah. But it just shows, though, that launching a smear campaign is the only response that they have to the truth, which means they're afraid of the truth because it's real. Right. And more people are seeing past the facade that they have built up for so long.
Well, there you have it. Tulsi responding. She came on this show and she called it pathetic. Kamala Harris's team basically calling her an Assad toady or accusing her of loving Assad. Well, what else did you get into that, and what do you think it tells us about her and her response to the Assad moment?
Well, I think it tells us as much about her, and of course she's an extremely important person to talk about, regardless of your politics and who you're following. I think we can all agree that politicians should be looked at because of their substance, their positions, their records, and not the way that their opponents frame them. And so I think what was so disturbing was watching the media just regurgitate that talking point. Gabbard made a very policy-based critique of Harris's record. She gave specifics, she gave numbers, she gave facts, and Harris and her people could only respond with the smear, calling Gabbard a God apologist, which has nothing to do with, it's not, whether or not it's true, I of course don't think it's true. I don't think she's an Assad apologist. I think she believes in engaging in diplomacy, which is something that's good. But even if it were true, it's totally irrelevant, and it's such a dodge and a deflection from what was being said. And the most disturbing part, I'm not as disturbed that Harris did that, because I expect that sadly from politicians. I'm disturbed by the way the media just carries water for these people and for these talking points. And no one really followed up with Harris on those questions. And in fact with Gabbard, they just asked her about the Assad thing.
Right.
They took exactly the direction Kamala wanted them to take, which was the direction they had already been taking with Tulsi. What do you think lies behind the media's contempt for her? Matt's piece, I think, is very appropriately titled, "Who's Afraid of Tulsi Gabbard?" In my own view, there are few things that are more politically courageous in this town than challenging the bipartisan sort of war machine, military-industrial complex consensus. Is that why there is such derision of her?
I think that's a big reason of it. I think also she kind of made herself persona non grata by daring to endorse Bernie Sanders during the 2016 primary, which she paid a price for. DNC, basically, I think officially or unofficially told her that she shouldn't do that. But yeah, I do think that there's a very scary and stupid discussion. And this is one of these things, I'm on the left politically, but this is one of these rare cases where I think the left and the right can agree on sometimes that the bipartisan, as you called it, consensus around foreign policy and the war machine is really scary and disturbing. And, there was a time, we talked about this in the interview, but what was the lesson of the Iraq War? Was it not that regime change is dangerous, costly, immoral, doesn't deliver what it promises? And I don't understand why, especially you have people who call Trump, a Cheeto Mussolini, and I don't like Trump. I agree with a lot of his assessments, but the same people who call him a Cheeto Mussolini somehow want him to be more belligerent with other countries.
Right.
It doesn't even make sense. Well, and we talked about this in the interview. What's the end game? What's the game plan? You say he's erratic. You say he has dementia, and you'd also at the same time like for him to ratchet it up with world leaders, who you also say are existential threats.
That is really the fundamental hypocrisy of a lot of these people. But so what is Tulsi's endgame? What did she say to you?
Well, I think the thing that impresses me the most is that she actually embraces diplomacy, and she brings it together with her experience, and I think this is very moving and important. Which is saying, like, when you've served with people, when you've seen it up close, because she was a medic, so she saw the death and destruction firsthand of what war reaps. You understand the importance of diplomacy, and you understand the importance of sitting down with someone and talking about something. And there's the refrain: you don't negotiate with your friends, right? That's what negotiation and diplomacy is required for. And speaking of hypocrisy, there was this really great example of that when Trump was talking about North Korea, and everyone's they were so scandalized that he was even considering having a discussion, right, with North Korea. And of course, Fox News, in their hypocrisy, was defending it because when Obama said he would do that, attacked him as like disloyal. And of course, a lot of people on the left who were attacking Trump as disloyal for that had defended Obama for doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Hypocrisy all around. Katie, the podcast is fabulous. I really recommend it to people. You also do this great bit going through some of the absolutely terrible slogans of the Democratic Party that was pretty horrifying. But I recommend it highly to people. Thank you so much for being with us, and congrats again.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for coming on.
Bye.
We'll have more Rising after this.